Welcome back to another .NET MAUI Beginner Series video. I'm James Montemagno, a product manager on the developer community team here at Microsoft, and today what we're going to do is continue our journey building native cross-platform desktop and mobile apps with .NET MAUI. Now previously, we started to build out our user interface with XAML, an XML-based markup language. And now what we're going to do is we're going to extend that user interface and make it responsive and reactive using MVVM, or Model-View-ViewModel. This architecture pattern is very popular when you're developing applications with XAML because it enables data binding, a way for your user interface to respond to your code behind and vice versa. It's sort of a way of managing your control and flow of data. Your view just knows how to display data. There's a button, there's a label, there's an entry. Your view model, you can think of it as code behind, but completely decoupled. And what it is representing is what to display. It may have a list of objects or strings. It may know what to do when a button is clicked, and it may know what to display in a label. And the binding system inside of .NET MAUI is what brings it all together, enabling your UI to automatically update your code behind and vice versa. It handles not only properties back and forth, but also events like those button clicks or swipe to deletes. So what we're gonna do now is head over to my machine and we're gonna update that application and integrate MVVM directly into this application so we can be more productive and abstract our code in a very nice, testable way. So let's head over there now. So far, we've created our user interface for our My Task application. Here it's running on both Windows and on Android. Now, so far we're able to see the items, and that's just mock data. We have no way of entering or deleting the task yet. So let's go ahead and implement this, and we're going to implement this with MVVM. So let's go ahead and open up the source code. And the first thing that we can see that we're doing is that we don't actually have any data bindings to the entry or any way of interacting with this button yet either. Same thing down here with the swipe items. We would want to probably add something to say, when I tap on this swipe item, do something. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come in and we're going to create a new folder by saying add new folder. I'm going to call this view model. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another class. And this one, I'm going to call it main view model. Now I like to create my view models very similarly named to my pages. So main view model, main page. Now this is going to be some default code here. So we're just going to go ahead and delete all of our usings. We don't need those. And we're going to make this a public class. Now there are some traditional ways of implementing MVVM into our application, which is by implementing iNotifyPropertyChanged. Now iNotifyPropertyChanged gives us this system command component model. And when we implement this here, we can see that we get an event of property changed. Now this is an event that .NET MAUI will subscribe to automatically, which means that we can notify .NET MAUI when we want it to update the user interface. So we would probably create a little method for ourselves called onPropertyChanged, pass in a string, which would be the actual variable name here. And then what we could do is simply come in and say property changed event, and we're going to go ahead and invoke it. We can pass it this as the sender and then give it a new property change args of name. Now, if this looks a little bit scary, well, don't worry. I will walk through exactly what it's doing in an example here. So let's say we had a string of text, and that's what we wanted to data bind our entry to. So we're entering text here. So what we could do is create a public string of text. It's really important that it's public. That is how the data binding happens. And here we'll say get, and we'll return text. There we go. And now when we do set, we can also just set the value. But the other thing that we would want to do over here is not only set the value, but also come in and say on property changed and give it the name of text. There we go. So this means if we set the text property, it will set the code behind text value and then raise this property change notification, which means that the entry will automatically be updated and vice versa. The entry is automatically two-way data bound, which means if we enter text here, it will automatically set the value right here in our code behind. Now, this does seem like a lot of code. So what's amazing is that there are amazing libraries from the community and from Microsoft to help simplify this. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to right click on the project. We're going to say manage Nuget Packages. And we're going to go ahead and search for the Community Toolkit.mvvm. And specifically, we want version 8.0. Now, it may be in preview when you're watching this, or it may be in full release. If you don't see 8.0, just check that include pre-release. Now here, we're just going to go ahead and hit install. And what I love about the .NET Community Toolkit is that this works with any .NET application. And it gives us source generators to generate awesome code for us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to delete all this code that we just wrote, besides string.text. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make this a partial class. And we're going to go ahead and inherit from observable object and bring in the Community Toolkit MVVM component model. Now what this does is it automatically gives us a bunch of those implementations. So set property, on property change, it implements iNotify property changed for us automatically. Now, what's also really cool is that it implements a bunch of source generators. So here I can say observable property. Now, when I do that, what's great about this private string is that observable property will generate source code for us. In fact, it's telling us right here as I hover over what it's going to do. Now I can go into my dependencies and into any of these analyzers, and I can actually see the source generators in action. Here's the observable property. And specifically here is that text property. Now this is generated code, so it's not the prettiest code, but it's highly optimized. So here we can see here's our text, and it'll automatically call the property change for us, which is really cool. And it does a bunch of data caching as well to super be optimized. Cool. So now we just have one line of code, which is a lot prettier. So now what this means is that we have our observable property up and running. Now, if I come back over into my XAML, I can now set the text property here, binding to text. All right. Now we can note here that this is telling me that there's no binding context for text. So we need to also clean that up too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new namespace. Just like we were using a namespace in code, you can have a namespace in XAML. And here I can just type in ViewModel and it will find the namespace for us automatically in the IntelliSense. And what I'm then going to do is do something called x:\datatype. And what this will do is it will automatically associate this content page with the view model. And we saw the little squiggles now go away, which is pretty great. Now, the other thing that we need to do inside of our view model is create an interaction. Basically, what we want to do is we want to be able to tap this button and call a method. So what we're now going to do is we're going to create something called a command. Now, commands are actually built into .NET MAUI, and you can use one there, but you can also use a command that is built into the MVVM toolkit for .NET. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and create a method called add. There we go. And what we want to do here is we want to add our item, and then we're going to set the text property to string.empty. So we just clear it out. Now all we need to do is add another attribute called ICommand to the top of it. And ICommand is going to live inside of the Community Toolkit MVVM input. And just like we saw earlier, if I pull over my source generators, there's ICommand, and we can see that this generated a bunch of code for us as well. And at the end of the day, this is going to give us an IRelayCommand, and it's going to create a new command for us. And what it's going to do is call the add event automatically. This is really, really nice because if this was asynchronous, it would automatically handle that for us back and forth. And it's just really nice tight code. All right, the other thing we need to do is create another property here. And this is going to be an observable collection of type string. And we're going to call it items. Now let's go ahead and bring that in the system collections object model. And again, we're also going to call this an observable property. Perfect. Now the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new one here. So I'm going to say new main view model here, and I'm going to say items equals new. Perfect. All right. So now that we have that newed up and we can data bind to it, what we'll be able to do is add that item. So I'm going to say items.add, and I'm going to set the text property here. Perfect. Now I might want to also do something like say if string.isNull or white space on text. Let's go ahead and return. There we go. We'll also just make sure we always use the capital text there just to be sure. There we go. We add it and then we empty it out, and that'll be added into our list. So now if we go back into our main page, we want to get rid of this item source. So we're going to go ahead and delete that here. Boop. And what we can do now is some data binding. So I'm going to say item source, and I'm going to set that equal to a binding to items. And notice the IntelliSense automatically picks everything up for me. Now I need to do one more thing. Just like we actually set a data type right here for the view model, we also need to set it onto our data template, because this data template isn't bound to this main view model, it's bound to a string. That is what is inside of here. So I'm going to say x data type. I'm going to say x colon string, x colon type, x colon string. And what that's going to do is associate the data template to be a string. Now here, most likely we would have some sort of model like a to-do item inside. Now the last thing I need to do here before it is ready to go is I actually need to come in and I need to say command. I need to set what the button is bound to. So I'm going to give it a binding to the add command. Now this isn't a clicked event, but it is a command, which means that when it is clicked or interacted with, it'll call the add command that will execute add. Notice that we're binding to the command. That is the one that was generated right here for us automatically. We can see it's called add command, whereas the method it's going to be calling is add. All right, the last thing we need to do is actually create the binding context for this page. So I could come in and say binding context, which will associate it with this page to a new main view model. That's one option that we can do here. If we bring this in, that'll automatically create it in our code behind. But we can actually use the built-in dependency injection system to cascade these down. And that's great when we add additional dependencies into the main view model, which we'll see in the future. So I'm just going to say VM, and I'm going to pass in the VM. Now the last thing we need to do is to register this system with the dependency service. So I'm going to go into the MAUI program. And before we build it up, I'm going to say builder.services.add singleton. And there's two different types of things that you can add into a service: a singleton, which means it's sort of like a global static, it creates it once, or a transient, which will create it every single time. And we'll use that in the future. But we're going to go ahead and add a singleton here, and we're going to add a main page first. We're going to register the page. We're also going to add another singleton here, and we're going to call it main view model. All right. Now, when we do this, these will now be automatically registered with the dependency service, which means that when I create this up, and if I put a breakpoint onto the main page view model, we'll see that it'll automatically be created for us. This is really, really cool, and one of my favorite features of .NET MAUI in Shell. There it is. It's automatically created for us, and we can see that we have 0 items here. So let's go ahead and continue on. Let's open up our application. So now what I'm able to do is say bananas and hit add, and now our bananas are there. Whoa, amazing. I can also add a breakpoint here. So if I hit add, we can see that that add is being called, and boom, just like that, the view comes in to the text and it says that it's empty. So there we go. If I come in and say apples, hit add, and sure enough, now we have apples right here. You can see it in full glory. All right. Now the last thing we wanted to do is actually add that swipe to delete. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we are going to come in and stop debugging one more time, because we're going to add a little bit of code over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ICommand and I'm going to say void delete. I'm going to pass it in a string of s. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if items dot contains s, then let's go ahead and remove it. So items dot remove s. There we go. That's all we're really going to do. See if it contains it and then remove it. And that should remove it automatically from our list. And you notice that when I added it, it also automatically added it to the user interface. And that is because with the observable collection, it automatically will trigger different notifications when things are added or removed. So that's pretty great. There we go. So now we have our command. So now what we need to do is go into our main page and specifically add a command to the swipe item. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come in and say command. Now remember though that we're currently bound to this string, so it doesn't actually know anything about the view model. So we need to give it something called an ancestry binding, which basically means relative binding. It says, hey, don't use this data type or this binding, use the one above it. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to say binding source equals, and it's going to be a relative source. And here what we're going to do is give it an ancestry type to say, go up the stack and find something for me. And we're going to say x:type and view model main view model. All right, that does seem a little bit complex, but bear with me here because the last thing we need to do is say path, and then we're going to say, please find the delete command. All right, so if we walk through this, it's going to say, don't use the source, use a relative source. It's an ancestor of type view model. So walk up, look for view model, and specifically call this command. Now we do need to pass it one more thing though. We do need to pass it a command parameter. In that case, we are going to set it to bind, just like this. So this is going to pass the string to the command and delete it automatically. So let's go ahead and debug this now and add a breakpoint into our delete. And what we'll see is that we'll have generated a command that automatically takes in a parameter. So this is pretty cool. So here's our application. I'm going to say apples, add, we get our breakpoint. We'll say bananas, add, continue on. Now we get our swipe. I'm going to hit delete. Sure enough, what's passed in here is our apples automatically. We're now going to remove them. And the animations are all completely built in. We've now gone from start to finish using MVVM and data binding to create a full application. Well, there's a lot more that we can do.
All right, there you have it. We've just integrated an MVVM architecture pattern with data binding into our .NET MAUI application. Now, next up is something very common that you're going to do in any of your applications, which is navigation. Navigating from page A to page B and back and forth. So stay tuned to the .NET MAUI Beginner Series.